Tonight I will be sharing 6 stories. The main focus will be the paranormal. However, as we always do, there will be much more to offer. Other dimensions, creatures with unknown intent, and two-faced people, but not in the way you might be thinking. A huge thank you to the writers for allowing me to share their stories. Remember, you can send in your own story to rylhstories@gmail.com. Please remember to drop a like if you enjoy, as it helps out the channel in a real way. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. This is not a test. Seek shelter and barricade yourself inside immediately. Do not let anyone inside under any circumstances, unless they can be verified as a local police officer. If you have time, cut off the hair on the back of your head. Hair on the back of your head. I've always kept my hair long. It's just the way I like it. I figure it might be because I want to hide as much of myself as I can from other people, as I've worn it this way since my uncomfortable teenage years. This, however, makes me seem like something of a hipster, because after Eliza Matthews did that talk show a few months ago, everyone in the States has been wearing their hair long. You weren't considered cool anymore, unless your hair covered your ears and nearly brushed your shoulders. All the lights are out. I'm sitting alone on the couch in the living room, and my face is glowing blue from the light of the television. I have the remote sitting lazily in my hand. As I'm flipping through the channels, I stop on the same late-night television show, Jimmy Gilmore's, who conducted the now viral interview with Eliza. I scoff when I see him sitting behind his glossy desk. Gilmore's black hair is now 3 times longer than it used to be. It curls in a goofy way, like a California surfer, making him look even more strange with his creaseless blue suit and black tie, flashing his blindingly white teeth at the camera. I click the television off, and the darkness of the house consumes me. My head falls back with exhaustion to lay on the backrest, and I stare upward at the popcorn ceiling. I can feel a cold coming on, still in its early stages, but as I lay here, I find that I can't breathe, like a sudden asthma attack, and I heave in through my mouth, desperate for air. Then the doorbell goes off. I glance up at the green, glowing numbers on the VCR and find that it's now 3:37 in the morning. I sigh, get to my feet, head past the kitchen, glancing ashamedly at the several towers of dirty dishes on the counter that have been there for far too long, and arrive in the entryway where I can see a figure through the pane of glass on the front door. I turn the lock and pull the door open. Standing in the doorway is my younger brother in his, now soggy, security guard uniform, and his hair is wet and glued down on either side of his head. Based on the stench wafting off of him, I'm able to determine that he's drenched in what has to be sweat. I scrunch up my nose as he tries to step past me, and I don't move out of his way. Shower, I tell him, holding my breath. He frowns up at me, giving me that, "Are you serious?" face like a teenage rebel, but eventually he sighs, rolls his eyes, and mutters something in submission. I then step aside, and he passes by me and climbs the staircase, disappearing into the dark before he even reaches the top. When I hear the bathroom door close, I turn to look outside. The cold air brushes my face, and cleanses me of my brother's smell. It's somehow darker outside than in the house, with only a dull orange glow coming from a street lamp across the road. I spot a person standing beneath the lamp, and facing the other direction, staring at the bare dirt where an apartment complex will eventually be. The stranger is bundled in a heavy, gender-neutral blue jacket, and with their trendy elbow-length hair flowing down their back. There is no way to determine if the person was male or female. The person isn't moving, they're just standing there, staring off in the opposite direction of our house. I assume they're waiting for a ride, or walking their invisible dog, and I shut the door, turning the lock and pushing on it hard with my fingers just to make sure. I hear the pattering sound of the shower running in the upstairs bathroom, and I pray that he uses a lot of soap, and shampoo, and deodorant, and cologne. I walk back to the kitchen and I see the blue light of the television shining from the living room. I look over the counter and see Gilmore's grinning face, now frozen on the screen. After a moment, the entire screen changes to a solid blue background, and a wall of white text. The speakers on the wall are emitting a low, monotone note as I read the message. Emergency alert system. This is not a test. Seek shelter and barricade yourself inside immediately. Do not let anyone inside under any circumstances unless they can be verified as a local police officer. If you have time, cut off the hair on the back of your head. Hey. I jump at hearing the voice from behind me and spin around to find my brother standing in the entryway and grinning at my fright. A towel is draped over his neck and he's wearing his pajamas now. Scared of the dark? He teases as he joins me in the kitchen. I look back at the television, but the screen is black, and now the warning only exists in my fleeting memory. You won't believe. I start, but I'm interrupted. Man, people were acting so nuts today. That was the hardest shift I've ever worked in my life. My brother complains as he pulls open the cabinet beside the sink, slides a glass from inside, and fills it under the faucet. This one lady clawed a giant gash into Ricky's neck. It was so bad that he had to go home. That only made things worse for me and the new guy. My brother has always been like this. He won't let you get a word in until every thought of his has escaped out of his rapid lips. All I can do now is wait for him to finish. He holds up his index finger, and he puts the glass to his mouth. He downs the whole thing in seconds, and then turns it under the flowing faucet for a refill. While he waits, he stares blankly into the dark that surrounds us, and cocks his head in thought. Do you remember that one story that Dad read to us when we were young? He asks. I blink at him. Why? He rolled his eyes. Yes or no? I know the story he is referring to, the scariest one. I still occasionally have nightmares from its haunting effect on my mind. For right now, however, I refuse to let the details surface, refuse to let it scare me again. Exactly. He reads my mind. That one. You just missed the strangest warning. Such a scary story. My brother adds and shakes his head. There was a warning on the TV. I spit out as fast as I can before I'm interrupted again. It said to barricade our home and to cut our hair, which is so weird. Hearing myself say it made me realize how crazy it sounded. Did you lock the door? My brother asks, water overflowing from the cup. I nod. He pulls the cup from the waterfall and chugs it just as quickly as the first. When he's finished, he puts the cup atop a chest-high stack of dishes on the countertop, balancing it there like the decorative top on a tower of cards. Sounds like a hack, he says dismissively. Probably just someone hating on Elizo. My shoulders relax a little. That made sense. Somehow, despite his flawed history, my brother could still sometimes manage to be the more rational one. I eyeball the soggy towel draped over my brother's shoulders and, figuring that he won't return it where it goes, I reach to snatch it off of his neck. But he jumps back and his hands secure it tightly like a scarf. You better hang it back up. I warn him as he squints at me. A loud crashing sound erupted from somewhere inside the house. I stare wide-eyed at my brother as he furrows his brow, like an amateur actor, playing a tough biker, and looks back towards the entryway. Sounds like it came from the garage, he says, and leads the way toward the source of the noise. As I follow him out of the kitchen, I'm struck with guilt. I'm the older brother. If anyone should be defending our home, it should be me. So I race past him and put my hand on the door that leads out into the garage like a child claiming dibs. My brother scoffs at me, still in character. The ladies first, I guess. I push open the door. It's as dark in the garage as it is everywhere else. I don't hear anything inside. I feel up the wall, find the light switch, and flick it on. Immediately I'm blinded by the brightness of the buzzing fluorescent lights. When my eyes adjust, I find the garage as it always is, a mess. My parents' belongings are stored in a city of towers of cardboard boxes, all stretching nearly to the ceiling. I spot what made the loud noise right away. One of the towers had collapsed into a heap on the concrete floor. Well, any ghosts? My brother asks, as he tries to peer over my shoulder. Just some of Mom's stuff that fell over. Better make sure that nothing broke, he warns, now bored and turning away. Sounded like at least something did. I walk into the garage and stop before the fallen stack. I stand up the nearest box, open up the flaps, and begin searching through the framed pictures, knickknacks, and decor when I hear something not far from me. The sound reminds me of when my brother, at the time a toddler, would impatiently smack the tabletop, demanding his dessert, or like bare footsteps on the cold concrete. I shakily look up from the box. Standing behind one of the stacks is a woman. Her back is turned to me. Her long black locks flow all the way down to the backs of her worn-out jeans. She stood there frozen in place and facing the other direction, so I wonder if she hasn't spotted me yet. I very carefully rise to a stand and start to step backward for the door. I'm nearly there when my elbow catches on one of the towers of boxes. It tilts to the side and falls over in slow motion, recreating the same loud noise. I snap my gaze back to the strange woman, but she's gone. I panikedly look all about the garage at the other towers, but there's now no one in sight. I turn on my heel and sprint for the door. Running footsteps are suddenly closing in from behind me. She was close. Just as I reach the door, it opens, and my brother is standing on the other side, looking annoyed at first. "Are you kidding?" He starts, but freezes when he spots the woman chasing me. I run past him and he slams the door back shut and quickly turns the lock. "Who was that?" he yells. I'm leaning against the railing of the stairs, trying to catch my breath. "I don't know," I say between my gasps of air. We need to call the police." I pull my cell phone out of my pocket and punch in 3 numbers. Just as I'm about to push the green dial button, a sound stops me. The doorbell. "Police, open up." A muffled male voice yells from outside. "That was fast," my brother jokes, but I can tell he's afraid. I look from him to the figure in the glass on the door, and the alert on the television flash back to my memory. I step over to the door and click open the lock. The door swings inward on its own, and I jump back to miss being hit by it. I look up and I'm staring down the barrel of a handgun. Turn around. The uniformed cop orders in a gruff, stern tone. I raise my hands and open them until my phone falls and smashes on the floor. I turn slowly until my back is to the officer. "No sudden movements," the policeman warns. Slowly back up towards me. I'm visibly shaking as I take 2 steps back. My brother is standing aside and watching the scene. The officer hasn't yet spotted him in the dark house. "Why didn't you cut your hair?" the cop asks forcefully. I don't know," I stammer out. I didn't think the warning was real. When he hears the fear in my voice, the policeman's tone changes to be less threatening, like he's speaking to a crying, lost child. But I don't hear him lower his gun. "That's okay," he says. "Just continue out the door, alright?" When I try to respond, I find that I can't. A fear-caused lump has appeared in my throat, blocking my voice, so I just nod to let him know that I'm still complying. As I'm about to step outside, I see my brother silently pull open the top drawer in the cabinet beside the door. I shake my head at him slightly, but he still doesn't stop. "Who else is in there?" the policeman shouts, noticing my silent communication. With a finger to his lips, my brother slides our dad's revolver from out of the drawer. He's holding it upside down with his pinky finger at the trigger. He mouths a single word to me. "Duck." Unable to speak up, I can't argue. I just shut my eyes and bend forward. I hear my brother step in front of me and... My ears are ringing. I don't open my eyes ever after the last pop. A hand grabs my shoulder and gives me a fast shake. My eyes blink open, and I find my brother staring aghast right over me. I follow his gaze out the open front door, to find the officer now lying on his back, with a dark stain growing on the front of his uniform, with 2 distinct holes in his chest. The final shot landed directly on his forehead. His eyes were rolled back, and his mouth was ajar. "What have you done?" I ask, horrified and unable to peel my eyes off of the dead man on my doorstep. "He was going to kill you," my brother insists. "How do you know that?" "Just trust me." He sounds like he might cry. "Come on, let's go to my room." He starts to pull me toward the staircase, but I don't budge, so he glances back at me. "Don't bring that," I tell him, and motion at the revolver in his hand. "How are we going to defend ourselves? Just leave it down here, okay?" He grunts something that must have been in submission, because he returns the gun to the drawer. I shut the door, doing everything I can not to look at the pair of black boots that face up toward the sky, and I turn the lock and push on it with my fingers. My brother then leads me up the stairs, into the dark and to his bedroom. His room is smaller than mine, much messier and has less furniture. His bed is just a bare mattress that lays in the corner. We cross the room together and sit next to each other on the bed with our backs against the wall, and facing the closed door, neither of us saying a word. I recall, finally, the story that my brother had mentioned earlier, A story about a man born as a Siamese twin with a second face on the back of his head. The face, according to the story, would whisper nonsense to the man at night, keeping him from ever being able to properly sleep. After too long of this, the man took his life and, finally, silenced his other face. I slowly turned my head to look at my brother beside me. The towel that was on his shoulders is now gone. He's hugging his knees and breathing just as heavily as I am. I'm staring at him when I see something strange. The long strands of hair on the back of his head sway out, like they're being tossed up by a breeze, then sucked back in against his scalp, then out again, then back. I jump to my feet and back away from him. "What?" he asks me, and when he sees the look on my face, grows more uneasy. "What is it?" I'm still reversing. My heel bumps the door, and I feel it up until I find the handle. I click the lock open with my fingers. "You're leaving me alone?" my brother asks, sounding betrayed. I don't respond. I'm shaking as I push the handle down and pull the door back open. I escape and hurry across the hall and into the bathroom where I lock myself inside. I sit on the toilet and bury my face in my hands and sob into them. Tears stream through my fingers and run down my hairy arms. I can feel the tears even roll down the back of my neck, under the hem of my shirt, and tickle my spine. I freeze. My hands shakily leave my face and reach up behind my head to touch the tips of the back of my hair. It's wet. I dig in for my scalp, but my fingers touch a shapely, fleshy protrusion. A nose. I always loved to go ghost hunting as a kid, about 11 years old maybe. I would take my friends along with me and we would explore my house with flashlights to see what we could find. I lived in a brand new house, in a very new and nice neighborhood, so the idea that there were any spirits at all was ridiculous. Nonetheless, our favorite pastime quickly became this ghost hunting thing. Oftentimes, we would exaggerate. If we heard a small noise, we'd swear it was a demon. If we saw something out of the corner of our eye, we'd declare it the same. Over time, we established that certain parts of the house were more haunted than others. I told my friends there was a ghost girl in the upstairs bathroom, and an unidentified creature that would scratch on the outside of my bedroom wall at night. Both not true, but we went with it. And the ghost girl story was enough to keep one of my friends out of the bathroom almost unconditionally. Even when we mocked and acknowledged this ghost hunting pastime for being a fake creation of ours. Like a reality TV show, we'd find ourselves camping out in the garage the next weekend and peeing in buckets because we were too afraid to go back inside after hearing a noise while my parents weren't home. Now, don't get it twisted. We weren't actually scared, dreading every moment of the night and wishing it would end. In our minds, we knew what we were doing. It was fun. But it was the longer we continued this gag, the more we began to notice that things were, for once, actually out of the ordinary. It started out subtle. Houses always creak and groan from time to time, but we found that it became more common, especially when my parents weren't home. But we tried to ignore it if we weren't actually doing the ghost hunting game. Eventually, we started seeing more things out of the corners of our eyes. It could have just been paranoia from the increased sounds, and it probably was, because at one point, my friend mistook the ceiling fan for someone actually clinging to the ceiling, which was weird because he's been in that room and seen that fan a dozen times. Despite these increases in activity, I remember making the claim that I saw something under my stairs closet. I was lying, of course, just like most other claims and stories that we told each other, but we once again went with it and explored. All three, or four of us at the time, went down to investigate the under the stairs closet, and as we were doing so, my parents rushed down the stairs in a hurry to make it to their poker night, inadvertently giving us all the miniature heart attacks from the old house. The entrance to the stairs closet was in view of the front door, so as my parents passed, I said bye to them and told them what we were up to, or that was the plan anyway. After a few moments of them still not walking around the corner, I rounded it myself to see what they were doing. I figured Mom must have been looking in that big tall mirror, making sure that her outfit was perfect, and my dad would be waiting there impatiently, but they weren't there. I walked a little further and looked up the stairs. Nothing. I went back to my friends and gave them a look, and they gave one back. I walked over to the window and peered outside, discovering that their car was gone. they had already left. Ooh, my friend exclaimed in realization. They did already leave. Don't you remember they said bye? He was right, and my other friends agreed. My parents had already left, but then what was running down the stairs? I quickly looked for an excuse as to what it could be. Trying to dismiss something scary was often what we did to prove to each other that this was real and not a gag. Even though, 90% of the time, it still wasn't real, and it was totally a gag. But this wasn't one of those times. Pointing to my 2 dogs, I suggested that it could have been them, but that was impossible, we discussed. My dogs were very small, and the weight of those footsteps, it was far more than my little dogs could do, and it felt far faster. Not only did this sound convey heft, but we could hear the walls vibrating when it happened. Looking back, I realized my parents would truly have to be sprinting down those stairs to make such a loud and quick sound. This event conjured images of a creature moving on all fours, but maybe it really was my dogs, we thought. Who could really know? My 2 little dogs bolting down the stairs together? Sure, why not? It's never happened before, but perhaps they could have made that kind of a sound in tandem, and I'm sure the sound was amplified in that closet. We left the stairs alone for that day. Days passed, and all was normal, but on this particular day, my friends weren't currently over. That was okay though, because we didn't just ghost hunt in packs. I, at least, would oftentimes take the camera and venture around alone. Even if I was sure that I wouldn't find anything, it was always fun to take a really fast picture while slightly jiggling the camera to see what sort of distortions you could create. I remember one time, I successfully created what looked like eyes in the dark by shaking the camera ever so slightly at a dim light in my room. This time, I took the camera to the downstairs closet again. My parents were home, just in the other room watching TV, so I felt safe. Thinking back on it farther, I wasn't even going in there with the intention of finding ghosts. I was filming a sort of first-person James Bond-style escape movie, and I thought the under-the-stairs closet would be a perfect prison for my character, since it dipped down and got narrower as you went further in. Whoever designed the closet was a little bit of an idiot though, because the light for it was located all the way in the back, and the closet winded around a load-bearing wall. I took my camera in, already recording, already getting into character, and already beginning to explain what this layer was, who it belonged to, and how I got there. Then I reached the light, flipped the switch, and turned around. The light was located on the wall, and I was standing in front of it, so, naturally, I would cast a shadow on the wall across from me, but mine wasn't the only shadow. It looked like something was swinging back and forth behind my right shoulder, but it was rocking back and forth at the same time, like a rocking chair tied to a pendulum. Oh, I thought, and looked down at my camera strap, which was dangling below. It must be this, and I turned around to look at the light to see if it lined up to cast a kind of shadow on the wall, but it didn't. The light was at about shoulder height with me, and the camera was a little lower than eye level, but the strap, of course, was not only in front of me, which I just now realized as I was recounting the story, never could have cast a shadow in the first place, but it was dangling below the camera, and the shadow that I was seeing on the wall was very much projected over my right shoulder, slightly above my head at the tallest point. The light wasn't even low enough to capture the strap, let alone distort it at such an angle, over my right shoulder. The longer I stared at the shadow, the wilder it got. It began to sway much further and faster, and it seemed like it was warping and getting taller. The rocking got more intense as well, and that's when I realized it really was a rocking chair, and a lady was in it. Its silhouette was no doubt simplified in shadow form, so it looked like your typical cartoon witch, a sort of oval body, bent over in her chair. I was viewing her from the side, so I could see her wicked, bulbous chin, and that long, gangly, stereotypical nose. Remembering that I was recording, I quickly ran out of the closet and went to my parents. For all the times I've been telling ghost stories, even as I went from joking to more believing, they were always dismissive of my claims. Now, I finally felt like I had proof. I brought them over near the closet and explained what happened. I felt a sense of power, knowing that I had it on video, as I watched them do their typical dismissal of my story, and look at each other with smirks as they wrote it off as my childish imagination. But then, when I told them I had proof, They watched it all, and I watched as their smug, amused faces faltered and soured into concern. They tried to hide that expression as they struggled to think of excuses. Even after the video, I knew they'd still dismiss it, and they did. Recomposed themselves and unconvincingly laughed it off, before my dad told me it was just the light casting a shadow from the camera strap. I frantically tried to explain to him that I had checked that already. I told him why it was completely impossible due to the angles, but they did the smart thing and said nothing in response. Complete dismissal of me, once again, but I knew that I had gotten to them this time. Eventually, they wandered back to their TV, and several weeks later, when I brought the story up again and reminded them that I had proof, the footage was finally gone, and somehow, I knew it would be. I was just thankful the footage didn't disappear before I was able to show them the first time, in typical horror movie fashion, like I suspected it would be. I asked them if they deleted it, because none of the other videos I had taken were gone, but they said they hadn't. I'm not sure if this spirit, or whatever it was, tampered with my footage and deleted it, because that sounds a little too cliche to me, or if my parents deleted it themselves, but the only reason I can think of that they would delete it was if they really believed it and just didn't want to deal with it. What I've learned from this is that if spirits are real, then they are certainly sentient, and they respond to our intentions. I believe this is why the Ouija board exists. So if you go searching long and hard enough in the same spot for them, even if they weren't in that place before, eventually, they'll be drawn to you. When I woke up, I noticed there were black smudges on the wall. I looked at them closer and realized that they were fingerprints. I asked everyone if they had been in my room last night. No one had, but I knew those fingerprints weren't there when I went to bed. I checked around all the doors and windows. I was worried someone might have broken in, but there was no sign of entry and nothing was missing. Not sure of what to think, I just had to assume that I had done it somehow before bed. Maybe I got up for a drink, or to use the bathroom, and touched the wall. A week later I had pretty much forgot about it, until I saw more. This time they were in the living room. The weirdest part is that they were in the middle of the room on the ceiling. The only way to reach that part of the ceiling would be with a ladder. I got a stepladder from the garage to get a better look. Unlike the smudges on my wall, these were full handprints. I was able to see more clearly the size of the prints, and realized they were definitely a child's hand. Besides the fact that no one under the age of 14 lives in the house, how would someone so young even get up there? A little while after that, I again woke up to see more prints on my wall, this time around the window frame. It looked as if someone had climbed in through the window. I checked and sure enough, it was shut tightly and locked from the inside. At this point I was baffled, and even open to the possibility of something paranormal. I was never one to believe in ghosts, but I had a friend who was. She told me to announce myself and ask the entity to reveal itself to me. I thought she was crazy, but I was so desperate for an explanation, I was willing to try. That night before bed, I said aloud my full name and announced, "Whatever is inside this home, specifically this room, please show yourself." That night, for some reason, I had slept more soundly than I had since finding the first prints. Until I had the most vivid dream of my life. I was sitting in my room, but all the furniture was gone. I sat on the floor, and across from me stood a little girl. I felt so strangely calm for some reason. "Who are you?" I asked, but the girl did not answer. Instead, she began to transform into something else. Her tan skin became paler by the second, and her eyes became bloodshot and sunken. Her short curly blonde hair grew and darkened. Her hair changed until it was stringy and black. "You're not asking me," she whispered. She looked directly into my eyes, which chilled me to the bone. I closed my eyes tightly for a second. When I opened them, she was back to her original cute form. "You're asking me." She looked scared as she said it, and took a step back. "Don't be scared." I stretched an arm toward her, but retreated with her next phrase. Her face twisted into an inhuman expression. "Yes, be scared." Her voice was different this time. She began to change again, this time excruciatingly slow. I could see every single change happen. I crawled backwards away from here. I was unable to stand, and wished I would have stood when I had the chance. "You wanted to see me," she screeched, and lunged toward me with her bony claw-like fingers stretched outward. Just when she was about to reach me, I closed my eyes and screamed. I woke up terrified in my own bed. When my eyes adjusted to the dark, I was looking at the ceiling and there it was. It looked directly at me and I froze. I'm not sure how long I was like that, but the next time I woke up, it was morning. I was lying on my side and glanced at the window. All of the prints and smudges were gone, even though I hadn't wiped them off yet. For a second, I was relieved. What if somehow that had worked and my friend wasn't crazy? When I rolled over onto my back, all of my relief vanished. It was replaced by cold, hard terror. On the ceiling directly above my bed, there was not only smudges, but scratches as well. I jumped out of bed and ran into the living room. I stopped in my tracks when I saw the living room ceiling. This time the scratches in the ceiling formed words. Don't ask again. Don't want again. I've never regretted taking advice more than when I asked it to show itself to me. I screamed and thrashed at the air. Every time I closed my eyes, there it was coming for me. I tried to warn everyone about it. The girl on the ceiling. I scared them. They said I was crazy, and they didn't see her. They had footage of me scratching and touching the ceiling after they set up nanny cams in the living room. They found the family dog dead. She was brutally murdered. They all said they knew I did it. I know I didn't do it. She did. The girl on the ceiling. That was enough for them to send me away. They were so desperate to get rid of me. My parents knew I wasn't crazy. They knew she is real. They just knew that she would follow me. What's sacrificing one kid to save the other three? I requested to be moved to the farthest hospital possible. It worked for a while. I didn't see the girl on the ceiling, but she found me. I know she did. I woke up a couple weeks ago, and there were black smudges on my wall. Last week, the common room had a handprint on the ceiling. 2 days ago, I saw her in my dreams. This morning, the ceiling was scratched. There are no dogs for her to kill this time. As I lay dying, an unfathomable distance from whatever ground lies below, I write this narrative to whoever may find these scribbles on my final crumpled piece of paper. The joints in my hand grow weak as I attempt to send this message to you, unknown friend. I have no advice or warnings. I only wish for my memory to not drift into eternal obscurity. Remember me. The morning dew had gathered on my face that 7th day of my voyage. Being on the run from the government was not as freeing and exhilarating as I had imagined. Have you ever felt true hunger before? It's suffering. Your stomach is a monster tearing at your internal organs. As I awakened, I stood up and wiped the moisture from my forehead. The deep forest around me was further darkened by the ominous clouds above. My belongings had been gathered the night before, so it took me less than 5 minutes to set off once again. I was determined to make it across the border, in the north, to find some under-the-table gig to sustain me for the rest of my days. If only I could find a convenience store, or anything that sold nourishment, to fill this growing void of hunger. My last $34 could buy me a month's worth of hot dogs or chips. But as far as I knew, I was deeper in the wilderness than any man had been in decades. There was little hope for anything but wild fruit and spring water. The sun barely peeked through the gray clouds as I crept through a flowery meadow. A massive gust of wind blew through the field, nearly knocking me to the ground. I ate some wild berries which tasted like the nectar of the gods to my dying stomach. I saw a mountain that was shrouded by a cloud in the distance. That was my savior, I thought. From there, I could wait for the fog to clear. I would be able to visualize the landscape before me. Forward I trod in the direction of the mountain. The hike to this mountain's foot was not tedious, and I made it there in a very good time. Stepping ever so carefully, I scrambled the rocks one by one. The small amount of energy from the berries gave me the strength to traverse the rugged mountainside with relative ease. The higher I climbed, the more I was consumed by the white clouds around me. The fog was growing ever denser as I traveled closer and closer to the top. It suddenly became apparent that I had reached the peak, yet my visibility was still eclipsed by the stormy sky. I decided to walk around the peak of the mountain until I found some cozy spot to rest my aching head and wait for the clouds to pass. To my great surprise, I saw what looked like a man-made structure close to me. About 12 feet below where I was standing, a large rope bridge gently swung in the gusty morning wind. The bridge appeared to descend into the clouds, for the sky was still opaque. Though I had seen no other mountains this morning, I was certain that I would find another mountain waiting for me at the end of this rope swing. Initially skeptical of the structure's ability to hold my weight, I examined the bridge for a moment. I shook the handles back and forth, waiting to see one of the wooden planks fall into the unseen abyss below. As I shook the side of the bridge, the sway felt incredibly heavy. The structure appeared to be highly sound. After being entirely certain this rope swing would hold my weight, I stepped on cautiously. Following several minutes of wary strides, I noticed that each wooden plank on the bridge was entirely identical. Each plank possessed the exact same pattern of tree rings and lines. The similarity of planks was an eerie sight, yet it gave me the impression that this bridge was a newly produced human structure. This farther influenced my state of calm. It appeared that the composition of this ladder was so pristine that it must have been artificially manufactured. The wood was shiny, perhaps too shiny. It gleamed as if the sun wasn't oppressed behind miles of clouds. The bridge had a radical descent, and I was beginning to wonder at what point the bridge would flatten, then switch to an upward trajectory. All rope swings possess a relative U-shape, yet this one was showing no signs of the returning ascent. I descended further and began to feel a slight sense of panic. Does this bridge descend directly to the ground? Further, I climbed down with no end in sight. The sensation of vertigo set in. I decided it was smart to turn around and return to the mountain's peak to wait out my loss of balance. The mountain from where I came was now obscured by clouds. I was utterly surrounded by whiteness in all directions. The only discernible sight was the upward trajectory of the rope swing ahead of me. I climbed the rope swing as quickly as I could, for my dizziness was increasing rapidly. It became harder to keep a firm grip on the handles. I slipped several times while trying to climb back quickly. Following my third slip, I lay down to rest for a moment. Below me, I could see no land. The clouds were as dense below as they were above. This only increased my sense of dread, causing me to quickly stand up. Upwards I continued again, but no mountain was coming into sight. The angle of the bridge stayed absolutely the same. As I pushed forward, the sight ahead of me remained indistinguishable from the planks I had just trod. 10 minutes passed, and I became concerned. I should have been nearing the mountain at this point. At least the shadow of stone should be mildly visible. I continued forward, thinking that perhaps I had misjudged the duration of my descent. 20 minutes passed, and the dread inside of me grew. What if there is no end? What if where I came from no longer exists? That's ridiculous, I told myself. You're just getting paranoid. I trudged on, but every step I took led me further into a state of dread. There was no end in sight. No matter how far I climbed, no destination could be reached. All that stood before me was the same identical wooden planks, appearing over and over again. That could drive a man insane, seeing nothing but the same wooden planks appear before you each step you take. I felt like I was on heaven's treadmill. My arms grew weak, and I could feel my legs tremble. The weight of my body hit the swinging bridge, and I let out a scream. There's no way out. Both the ascent and descent led to nowhere. I don't know what sort of metaphysical or interdimensional plane I have entered. I just want to return to civilization. If only I could see one tree again. Even a blade of grass would save me from this horrible dread. But no, I'm stuck in eternity's grasp. Whatever this happens to be. I don't know how long I've been here. I've run out of water. The night never seems to come, and I haven't been able to sleep. There's no time left for me. I'm going to jump. Perhaps what is down there is better than what is up here. I will release the scribbled page to the wind in hopes that some soul will find it and share it with the world. Remember me. I don't want to be forgotten. I'm afraid. I found this letter lying under a tree as I hiked the wilderness of Vermont. I thought that I would share it with you all. Peter Harrington. I work as a contractor for a very large, global and well-known company in the factory of an even larger, global and well-known company. I won't disclose the company names in case someone or something finds out I know. I have worked 3 shift rotations for just over 2 years now. The place itself just over 6 years. I always pictured work to be quiet and desolate on the night shifts, but I was wrong. Just as alive as it is during the day, to begin with at least. The huge turnstile clanged shut behind me after I scanned my pass on the RFID reader and shuffled through. The city of factory buildings loomed into the evening darkness that was consuming the sky. I could feel that familiar autumn chill returning as I made my way through the next turnstile and into the building in which I worked. The shift started the same way as they always do. I clocked in 15 minutes before the start at 8:45 p.m. to ensure a smooth handover, and soon the siren rang to release the current shift and for us to start. All was normal for the first few hours. The 11:30 p.m. break came, and I FaceTimed my girlfriend as I always do. The next couple of hours up until the 2 a.m. break flew by to my delight. When I'm on the night shift, I like to take my breaks away from everyone else. Being sociable with coworkers in the early hours really isn't my forte. I stepped out onto the outdoor bays, where the delivery wagons pull in to be unloaded. I threw my jacket on and just stood there staring into the cloudy night sky whilst getting my nicotine fix. I really enjoyed the silence out there, even if it was just for 15 minutes. As you can imagine, factories are loud, so taking some quiet time to yourself can be really refreshing. I looked at my watch, 2:15 a.m. Time to head back inside. As I reluctantly pulled the door open, I realized something. Inside the building was unusually silent. I didn't recall hearing the buzzer to signal break time being over. I must have read my watch wrong, but no, 2:16 a.m. I sauntered back to my workstation, expecting to see a coworker who would tell me there was an equipment breakdown, hence the silent building. Something felt off. Nobody was there. It was usually bell to bell working in that place. Strict adherence to break times is required. There was no humming from the production line, no scraping of forklift trucks as they carried away their loads. Not even the sound of a rodent scurrying across the concrete floor, just the sound of my own breathing. Great, I thought to myself, still half questioning what was going on. I thought maybe there had been some sort of breakdown, and I hadn't heard about it since I was out on the bays. I scanned around for someone to ask, but just as I turned my head, the power went out, and the entire warehouse plunged into darkness. What the hell? I whispered to myself. There was definitely something going on here. I scrambled for my phone to call my manager. Of course, typical Hollywood movie scenario. No signal. This could not be happening. I remember thinking to myself. I switched on my flashlight on my phone, as I literally could not see a foot in front of me. I shone it around as I tried to find my bearings and make my way to the rest area. I held the light out in front of my face to light up the way ahead, so as not to bump into anything. I crept through the darkness, taking extra caution as fear began to set in. I could see a silhouette up ahead, slowly becoming more apparent the closer I got. My heart rate slowed when I realized it was just an abandoned forklift truck. There was something on the seat. I illuminated the cab on the forklift, and what met my eyes shook me to my core. The boots of a coworker sat next to their respective accelerate and brake pedals. Nothing else, just the boots. That's when, as my eyes got used to the dark, I could see dozens of pairs of boots dotted around the warehouse. They were all positioned almost as if their wearers were still standing in them, or as if they had simply disappeared, leaving behind only their footwear. An ear-piercing scratching sound shattered the silence around me. I could hear movement above me in the roof, but the flashlight didn't shine high enough. A high-pitched shriek came from behind me. I span around, only to be greeted by more darkness. Then I saw it drop down from the ceiling, about 30 feet ahead of me. I immediately turned the light off on my phone. The creature rose up from the floor after it had landed, about 6 feet tall, slim and almost humanoid. It was completely black in color, with insect-like limbs. It had the face of a man, with a blank expression, and its fierce red eyes penetrated the darkness. Before it turned its head this way, I crouched down behind the forklift truck. I knew if it came this way, I could quietly climb inside the cab, and maybe start it up quick enough to impale the thing with the forks. As my mind raced, and I wondered what to do, I was startled by another scratching sound from behind me. My soul almost left my body as I turned around to see another identical creature pacing towards me out of the blackness. This one had a different face. Was that my manager's face? It was horribly disfigured, almost beyond recognition, but with the red eyes just the same as the other creature. Just as I was about to sprint for my life, it stopped. It looked right at me. Instead of ripping me to pieces like I imagined it would, it walked past me to the other side of the forklift. Were these things blind? That could maybe explain the red eyes. But I knew exactly where it was going. I edged backwards into the shadows and watched in sheer terror as it leant inside the cab of the truck and wrapped its arm around something I couldn't see. I heard a loud crack and then a crunch. Its torso emitted a yellow glint of light, enough light for me to see that the boots inside the truck were now showered in yellow liquid. It grunted and swiftly crawled over to the next pair of boots on the ground. I noticed the first creature I'd seen was also doing the same thing. Were they absorbing people? Why could I not see what they were absorbing? More importantly, why could they not see me? I didn't want to stick around to find out. I decided to grab my things and get out as quickly as I could. I clicked the light back on my phone and ran through the warehouse as carefully as I could to my workstation. I slung my bag over my shoulder and made for the outdoor bays again. I could still hear the scratching sounds coming from farther back, but I chose to ignore them. I could feel the air getting cooler as I got closer to the rolling shutter doors. I burst through the door into the night. No sooner had I put one foot in front of the other to get away. My phone rang. I stopped and took my phone out of my pocket. It was my manager. My phone's signal had come back, and the person whose face I saw on the head of that creature was now calling me. How? I answered and slowly raised my phone to my ear. Hello? I've been trying to get a hold of you for the last half an hour. Where have you been? I don't care about your excuses, just get back inside. You were spotted by a senior manager leaving out of the base with your bag. I'm waiting. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I opened the door again and poked my head in. The lights were back on, the machines were running again, and I could hear the liveliness of the factory. What had I just experienced? I went back inside and the shift continued as normal. My manager and my coworkers were there. Nobody seemed any different. There were no traces of the yellow liquid, and nobody seemed to have the same experience I did. I clocked out at 6:15 a.m., walked up the path and through the turnstiles, staring at the building. The whole place made me feel very uneasy, and I really do not want to return back tonight. What if it happens again, but this time, they can see me? "10 years on, and this still creeps me out. It's going to be long, because there's a few things that happened. Not sure if they were connected, but they were enough to make me write them down here. When I was in my early 20s, I moved out of my home and in with my girlfriend. It was my first time out of home, and we decided to move to a town with 10 times the population of my tiny hometown. The area we had picked out was quite a nice area that backed onto a park, with a small strip of shops across from the park, and not a whole lot of traffic, as it wasn't on the way to anywhere else. It was close to work, but also close to the local bars, so as we soon discovered, you'd be woken up at 3 a.m. by a group of people stumbling through the park to get home. But all in all, it was a good little area. We looked at a few rental houses online in that part of town and decided on one, and did the walkthrough. It was a good price, nice hardwood floors, 3 bedrooms, central heating, and most importantly, a large lounge room for gaming and sitting back, and having some drinks with friends on the weekend. As we were wandering through, I looked at the doors and windows. The front and back doors were dead-bolted, with the front door having a chain across it, and all the windows had locked when shut, black plastic handles. You'd pull on the handle to slide the window left to right, and when you push the window back, the black handle would slide over a lip and into a groove along the metal frame, making a loud, hollow, clung sound, so you knew the window was fully closed and locked. I took note of the windows and doors for a reason. As a kid, I was right into the usual stuff a kid is into. Aliens, UFOs, ghosts, all that good stuff. Often I'd go to bed and lay awake at night, imagining I'd heard a noise out in the hallway, or thinking I'd seen something peer through the very edge of the door frame. The more logical part of my mind knew I was imagining it, so I'd just concentrate on the posters in my room, and I'd be asleep soon after. But even to this day, I have this fear of someone getting into the house without me knowing. Anyway, we applied for the house, got approved, moved in, and spent our first night there on a cold July evening, and that's when the weird stuff started to happen. We hadn't assembled the bed frame yet, so we were going to sleep on the mattress on the floor. I just wandered around the house, turning all the lights off. I was about to get into bed when I realized I hadn't checked the back door. I walked through the hall, into the kitchen, into the back door. I hadn't locked either the screen door or the heavy wooden door, so I did so, giving both doors a vigorous twist, push and pull, to make sure they were actually locked. They were, so I closed the hallway sliding door, wandered down the hall into the bedroom, closed the bedroom door, and got into bed. I was drifting off, in that half-asleep, half-awake state, when I was jolted awake by the sound of someone rattling the back doorknob. Not a quiet sound like someone testing to see if it was open, but a good hard rattle, like when you lock yourself out and angrily shake the door, hoping against hope that it'll spring open. My girlfriend and I sat bolt upright. My heart was pounding and my voice shook as I muttered, "Fuck," to myself. We sat dead still, listening for sounds down the side of the house, or the same rattle at the front door, but nothing. After a good 15 minutes of listening, I laid back down and, staring at the blank wall where my posters would have been as a kid, I fell asleep. The next day I walked outside and looked around. The backyard was bare and it hadn't rained heavily in about a week, so there were no footprints or other signs that anyone had been there. Ordinarily, I would have dismissed it as a one-off thing. Some guy looking to steal some stuff, tried the door, and slinked off to try the next house. But the doorknob had rattled, not the screen door handle. How do you manage that from the outside when the screen door was locked? About a week and a half after that, we were sitting in the lounge room, catching up on some TV I'd recorded earlier that week. We heard a noise outside, so I muted the TV and listened. It was the sound of perhaps half a dozen dogs barking, baying, and yipping about 2 blocks over. It wasn't your usual neighborhood dog barking session, where one sets off the others all around the area. It was all coming from the same direction, and sounded like they were all right next to each other. They howled for about 10 seconds longer, then fell dead silent. Not a trailing off mix of gruffs and wolves, but as if someone had pointed the TV remote out the window and pressed mute. The silence was that sudden and absolute. My girlfriend and I looked at each other uneasily, but once again, I reasoned it away as some guy with a few dogs, maybe a trainer with a dog whistle, telling his mutts to be quiet. We unmuted the TV and didn't hear them again that night. Later that night, at around 10 p.m., there was a knock on the front door. I opened it as far as the chain would allow and looked out. There was a guy who looked to be only a few years older than me. He was wearing a baseball hat and a dark green jumper, a pair of black track pants with 2 white strips up the legs, and a goatee. His green eyes showed concern, but he had a slight smile that belied that concerned look. "Hey, can I help you?" I asked with a friendly smile, looking the guy up and down, then looking over his shoulder to see if anyone else was with him. "Yeah, I just got out of a taxi at the shops and realized I left my kid's stuff in there. Can I use your phone to call the taxi?" He said in an unmistakable accent, leaning slightly to one side, his eyes darting past mine. Obviously, I felt uncomfortable with letting a guy I'd never met into my house to use the phone, so I lied to him. "Sorry, we've just moved in and we don't have a phone yet," I said, leaning carefully to the same side, hoping he wouldn't see the phone sitting on the end table right next to the door. "I need to call a taxi. Dave, can I just use a phone?" He insisted. I hadn't noticed he used my first name because I was trying to see who else was with him. I felt in my pocket and found a few dollar coins. "I can give you money for the payphone if you like. There's one out the front of the video shop," I said, withdrawing some coins, then jerking my thumb over my shoulder in the general direction of the strip of shops. This concerned look in his eyes slipped for a second, then came back. "Oh, no, it's okay. Never mind," he said, adding a hasty, mumbled, "Thanks," as he walked off. I quickly locked the door and checked the back door to make sure that was locked as well. Monday morning, I spoke to a coworker about the dogs. He lived a few blocks away, on the opposite side of the barking. He heard the same thing too, and figured, like us, that it was just some guy telling his dogs to be quiet. I didn't mention the taxi guy because I figured either he was actually trying to get his kid's stuff back, or he just wanted to wait until we opened the door, then charge on in. It was weird, but not dogs on mute weird. We had another week of peace, until the Saturday that still has me wondering what the hell was going on. Once again, sitting on the couch, watching TV. This time with a few empty cans of Jack and Coke on the coffee table in front of me, and some empty cruiser bottles in front of my girlfriend. Halfway through a recorded episode of Judge Judy, we heard the dogs again. Same direction. Sounded like half a dozen dogs. 15 total seconds of barking and yelping and baying. Then absolute silence. Like the mute button pressed mid-bark. By this point, I wondered if it was someone playing a CD of dogs barking then hitting pause. Though the barking wasn't the same as last time, I unmuted the TV and went back to drinking. That night we went to bed at around 1 a.m. pretty tipsy. Laying in bed, watching the roof rock back and forth. I heard a noise down the hall and in the kitchen. It was the creak of the cupboard door next to the stove. It was the only door that creaked in that whole set of cabinets, because it was the most frequently opened. I then heard something that damn near stopped my heart. "Hey, can I help you?" It was my voice. Not the hearing yourself on tape kind of voice, but the what you hear when your own ears whenever you talk kind of voice. My girlfriend obviously heard it too, because she sat up and looked at me, wondering if it was me laying next to her. She saw it was, and she stared at me, really freaked out. I got up, threw on some pants, and grabbed a small vase used to hold a single fake flower off the dresser. I opened the bedroom door and flicked on the hallway light, shouting out, "Who's there?" at the same time. There was nothing. The vase raised above my head. I crept down the hall, slid open the hallway sliding door, then carefully walked into the kitchen, back against the wall. I flicked on the lights in the kitchen and looked around. You could see the entire kitchen from the entrance of the hallway, as it was square, and all the appliances were built in, or had a nook to put them in. There was nothing. I leaned from the hallway door through the kitchen doorway and looked into the lounge room. It was dark, except for the blue glow of the power button on my desktop computer. You could see the whole lounge room from there, as the two couches were positioned so you couldn't hide behind them. There was nothing. I flicked on the lounge room lights by the front door, and then proceeded to look around the whole house. Front door was chained and deadbolted. The back door was deadbolted. The other bedroom doors were empty, and the doors closed. All windows were definitely clunged shut, and therefore locked. I didn't know what the hell was going on, but it scared the shit out of me. After checking everywhere a person could possibly hide, and after being totally convinced the house was empty and nobody had got in, I went back to bed. I don't know how, but I slept that night. I got up the next day and had a second look through and around the house. No signs of anything. Everything was still locked up tight. My mind instantly wandered to possible explanations, but it was getting more and more difficult to explain away what was happening. This time, I suggested to myself that we had both heard a sound, maybe a cat or something, because they can make some really odd noises, but there's no way you can mistake a cat howl for my voice. At this point, my girlfriend said she'd start coming to bed later, to kind of keep an eye out and see if she could notice anything. I agreed, and we did this for a while. I'd stay up on weekends, so we were both up fairly late anyway. Things seemed to go alright, and I started sleeping better, knowing someone was guarding the house. Well, until the Saturday. About 2 weeks after the modified sleeping schedule, I woke up at around 2 a.m. on a Saturday to see a light on from under the bedroom door. I got up, got dressed, grabbed the vase, and crept down the hall again. This time it was coming from the room my girlfriend worked from, and the door was partially closed. She wouldn't have left the lights on, because, well, that's something you'd notice when coming to bed. I tiptoed up and pushed the door gently open. I looked over at the computer desk and saw my girlfriend sitting there, working away on her computer. She turned around, saw me, and jumped, not expecting to see me up this late. "What's going on?" she asked, looking suddenly worried. "I thought you were asleep," I said, frowning a little. "Nope, I haven't been to bed yet. I've just been sitting here, working on some stuff," she said. I turned and walked back to the bedroom. I flicked on the light. The bed was empty. I hadn't actually checked the bed to see if she was sleeping next to me. I just assumed she was when I woke up. I wandered back down the hall and told her. We had a good laugh. Then I went back to bed. A week after this, we were sitting in the lounge room again. We'd walked across the park to the video store and rented Wayne's World and some other SNL skit that had no place being a movie DVD, and grabbed a fish and chips from the shop next door. Right around the product placement scene of Wayne's World, we heard it again. Those dogs. Mute the TV again. 15 total seconds of barking, then dead silence. Always a Saturday, always at night, always 15 seconds. I unmuted the TV and said to my girlfriend, "I think some guy has a motion alarm that plays dog barking sounds. Can't really explain it any other way." She nodded and mumbled her agreement through a gulp of Coke. We watched the other movie, played a few rounds of Mario Kart on the Wii, then called it a night. I fell asleep pretty much right away. Then around 4 a.m., I woke up to a humming sound in the kitchen. Not a mechanical humming, but a more human kind of humming. It wasn't humming a tune. It was just humming a monotonous sound, as if someone had typed M over and over again into a speech synthesis program. It was steadily getting louder. We both sat bolt upright again, listening to this steadily increasing human, wondering what the hell was going on. The sound got louder, until it sounded like it was right outside the door. We both stared in horror, thinking the door was going to spring open or something. The humming got louder and louder, but nothing had happened yet. I scrambled out of bed and grabbed up the vase again. I flung open the door, and the sound stopped instantly. I was terrified. I frantically waved my hand around the door frame looking for the light switch. The light came on with a steady warm glow, and once again the hallway was empty. I threw open the kitchen door, scared to see what was behind it, but even more scared to not open it. Nothing once again. I stumbled around the house, opening cupboards and doors, muttering, "The hell is going on here? The hell is it?" While my girlfriend sat in the bedroom shaking and sobbing. I grabbed a stepladder, climbed into the roof, and spent an hour up there, hoping I'd find a speaker or a faulty electrical cable or something. Just anything to explain what the hell had happened on each of those Saturday nights. There was nothing. Eventually I gave up, and we fell asleep long after the sun had risen. That was the last time we heard the dogs or the strange noises in the house. As soon as our lease was up, we moved out. I don't know what those sounds were, or if that guy who came to our door was part of it all, or what the go was with the dogs, but it was all just odd. We eventually moved back to my hometown into a nice little brick house. About 3 years ago, my girlfriend, now my wife, saw a person walking by her window, which is probably because you can't get to that window without walking through a ton of overgrown bushes, or going through a locked side door, but nothing's happened since. And now the whole house is fitted with a security camera outside, a security camera inside, and a bunch of door and window sensors, so we can catch any odd goings on.